Hello, my name is Bunny, and today I will be talking about this article I read, written by Alex Tizon, who is an American of Filipino descent, not too different from myself, and it is a very difficult topic, so keep that in mind as you're watching this. The article is about his slave, and it's called My Family Slave. And her name was Eudocia Tomas Pulido. Forgive me if I butchered that pronunciation. Her nickname was Lola, and Lola is what we call our grandmothers in the Philippines. Think of it as like grandma, granny, nan, if you live in the Western world. The name Lola or Lola in Spanish means sorrows, which is very fitting for Lola Eudocia's life. For those who have not read the article, I just want to make it clear that the Lola in Tizon's story is not his grandmother. While she did live with the Tizon family for most of her life, Lola came from a different family which was poverty-stricken, and she served the Tizon family in order to have food and shelter. Despite the abuse she faced, she likely never thought life would get better if she left the Tizon family. While editing this video, I felt I didn't make it clear enough that Lola was not actually related to the Tizon family, because I ended up using the word family 50 billion times in this video. I apologize for any confusion, and hopefully this little thing I added clears it up. I'm going to briefly talk about some points in the article. I highly suggest you read it for yourself if you want to fully appreciate this video, or just appreciate it for what it is. Earlier on, Lola was 18 years old, and Tizon's mother was 12 years old when Lola was found and given to Tizon's mother by Tizon's grandfather. And for shelter and for food, she would have to cook, clean after Tizon's young mother, and everything else. There would be occasions, though, where she would take beatings and punishments in place of Tizon's mother. That's probably one of the more messed up things in the article. What was even more messed up is that Tizon's mother seemed to have absolutely no sympathy about that. She acted like, oh wow, I was like a really bad child, rather than, I'm really sorry about that. Nope. Didn't seem to have any regret for doing that whatsoever. And eventually, Alex's mother grew up, got married, gave birth to Alex and several of his siblings, and they moved to the United States. They brought Lola with them, and Alex's parents promised Lola that they would finally start paying her for her services to the family. And it never happened. I mean, as a slave, you don't really get paid or get any sort of benefit for the type of work that you do. And she, for 50 plus years, almost never ever got paid, except when Alex's mother died of old age, and he paid Lola Eudocia $200 a week after that, but he still sort of owned or inherited a slave, which sounds kind of disturbing. Not only was Lola a servant, she was humiliated, made to feel guilty and shame because she was asking for money or asking to see her family, and would sometimes take physical abuse. And, a lot of people blamed Alex or pointed the finger at Alex because of what his parents had done, specifically what his mother had done to Lola. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the cultural context of my country, the Philippines, in order to not justify anything, because slavery is not acceptable. I mean, I guess if you want to, but it's like you can't really call yourself a slave if you're willing to do something. And hopefully a call to wake up and realize things need to change within our culture, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we have a horrible, terrible culture or anything. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. I'd like to make it clear that my opinions in this video are my own. I am not the spokesperson of the entire Filipino race. I am not the spokesperson of Filipinos that grew up outside of the Philippines. I do not even speak for Alex Tizon himself, so I only speak for myself. Please keep that in mind, and I hope that you will be respectful of my opinions, regardless of whether you agree or disagree. Going back a little bit to the criticisms that Alex Tizon received for being so-called complacent towards the abuse of Lola, having a slave to begin with, I would say that, yeah, Alex Tizon was complacent to Lola's abuse, but at the same time, I do not blame him. And, you know, it's very easy to get mad at somebody and say that you should have done this, you should have done that, you should have called the police, you should have said no to your parents, you should have screwed your parents over, whatever. But you don't know how you would act if you were in that situation, if you lived in that environment, if you were influenced by that culture. I feel like this is a perfect opportunity for people who didn't know too much about Filipino culture to engage with others and try to find out how could something like this, slavery, abuse, nobody in a large Filipino family and nobody talking about it. It's important to note that Alex Tizon, while had an extremely Filipino upbringing, is still American, and he does have a slightly westernized point of view, but he is very heavily influenced by his parents. I completely disagree that you have to be Filipino to appreciate this story, or the story only belongs to Filipino people. I feel like anybody can learn something from it and empathize. I want to get this completely out of the way first. There has been some debates on Twitter, or there were, because the fire of this controversy that started from this article has died down. There have been debates on Twitter about the semantics of the name Lola. Earlier, I said that Lola is a name, or what we call our grandmothers in the Philippines, and someone might have mentioned that Lola is a slave name, and a lot of Filipinos got defensive and said, you don't understand our language. I think that is like the least important point, and here is why. The Lola in Alex Tizon's story is completely treated differently. She probably acts very caringly, like a Lola is expected to, but the way she is treated by the family it's not how you would typically treat a grandmother. In a lot of Filipino families, grandparents babysit and look after the children when the parents are working, but they're not slaves. Usually they would have pensions or some sort of financial benefit from the family members, and they get to go out and do whatever they want, unlike Lola in Tizon's story. So it doesn't matter really that Eudocia's nickname in the family was Lola, because she certainly wasn't treated like one. I understand the reactivity and the defensiveness that comes out when people from outside of your in-group or culture make broad assumptions that are a very limited perspective. But, you have to look into yourself and realize that Filipinos make the same exact broad statements about Westerners based on movies and TV, which would be as if somebody would compare Filipino lifestyle to Filipino teleseries, which are completely overdramatic and unrealistic. Let's get to the point. Filipinos, in general, do not accept slavery. It's not the norm, but unfortunately, such abuses, some similar stories within family relations, or taking in a worker that's not even part of your family, such abuses happen. I would say because of two strong reasons. One is the culture of shame and religion within our country. Because of the prevalent shame in our culture and religious influence, stories like Lola's are allowed to happen over and over again because Lola is seen as under the mother, and then whatever the mother does is always right within the family. Parent worthiness is not really a concept that is known to Filipinos. People have to pray, sacrifice time, be forgiven of their sins, be baptized in order to appease God. And basically we're put in this life to make God happy so we can go to heaven. It's connected to the emotion of feeling shame, which is a very powerful emotion. If you can make someone feel ashamed of themselves, you pretty much have control over them. You can do whatever you want with them. There is this extreme example, which is not a lot of people practice this in the Philippines, but around Easter or Good Friday, they have people be beaten. Oh, it's voluntary anyway. They have people, like, it makes it better, but they have people beating and crucifying themselves. And this is not mainstream. It mostly attracts tourists, but the people participating usually are trying to heal a sick family member or trying to absolve of their sins. And again, that's an extreme example, and not a lot of Filipinos follow that way, but it's still part of our culture, so the mentality is still there. The shame, I have to work on to being loved by God. I'm not deserving of God's love inherently. I'm a sinner. I am a horrible person. I am not worth. A lot of songs and prayers are talking about how, oh, please forgive me for something, or I am not worthy to receive this thing, and basically self-deprecating. Imagine telling yourself every single day that you're just not good enough, but please love me anyway. That just sounds like someone with extremely low self-esteem. So going back to the family dynamic, parents, grandparents are like the gods of the family. They have given you life, so you have to spend the rest of your life paying them back through successful careers and hard work, because they sacrifice so much for you. That's what you have to do to them. And a lot of this is my limited experience again. When asked about why they would want to have children, or why did they decide to have children, the answer I typically tend to get is because I want someone to take care of me when I'm older, or don't you want someone to take care of you when you're older? And like, having someone take care of you is not wrong. Being loved, having our needs met is important for human beings, but to create a human just for the sole purpose of having them provide for you can lead to enabling an enabling relationship or be a little bit parasitic. But how do you know when it's healthy, and how do you know when it's abusive? Sometimes it's really hard to see the line. And unfortunately, people don't seem to incorporate or think about or take into consideration mentally, physically, sexually abusive situations within the family. As an example, I'll talk about my own grandmother. My grandmother, which I called Lola, she was very vicious. A lot of times was verbally and sometimes physically abusive. She got into everybody's business in the family. She didn't understand the word privacy. She would go through people's documents, diaries, look through their stuff, and make judgments based on what she observed, and would claim things rather than ask you about them. She would claim things broadly, and then if she didn't like something, you would have to change it. And to a certain extent, she dictated how some relatives could get married to certain people or not get married to other people. And people, I noticed my relatives were always fake around her, doing everything they could to please her. And yeah, I've noticed relatives who have cried because of her, because of things she had done or said to them. And she was a very scary woman. That's an understatement, that I thought my Lola was a very scary woman. You couldn't really complain because she was your Lola. She's always right and no questions asked. And I had a lot of resentment because of that. Alex Tizon's story is an extreme example, but I always hear very dysfunctional relationships within a family, but people try to maintain peace. People try to maintain harmony to the detriment of somebody else, usually somebody younger, or one of the younger generation people, because we have to make older people or our parents happy no matter what. And in Alex Tizon's case, he was just trying to keep his mother especially happy, and there was only probably in the article 2 incidences where he stood up to his parents. And to be honest, family relationships can be very cult-like, and it's something that you feel like you are powerless against. The virtue of respecting your parents and being there for your family has its benefits. It's stable that way, especially if you live in a place where it's not economically stable. You can always rely on your family to be there for you, but it does have its flaws. And I want people to realize that certain things are situational. Don't be just like, well, they're your parents, so how could you abandon them or accuse them of hurting you when they have? People seem to focus just on culture and tradition rather than using their brains. So emotional manipulation is very rampant in a family dynamic, and speaking from my own experience, if someone in my family committed a crime, if I suggested reporting them about their crime, I was shamed, because looking like a normal family is more important than, your emotions or your well-being. The second important factor is an economic hierarchy. Even though the Philippines calls itself a melting pot, it's very homogeneous. And homogeneous societies tend to be more focused on hierarchy and social class. Some other countries, like, your age is important or your caste system is important. but in the Philippines, it's all about money. More countries with more immigrants, they're less focused on hierarchy compared to people who are pretty much the same race in the country, like 90-80% of people are the exact same race. Anyway, going back. Money talks. Money talks everywhere. People who have a lot of money are treated almost like they're better than everybody else. Not almost, they're definitely treated better than poor people who work as nannies, drivers, kasambahays, katulongs. I'll explain kasambahays and katulongs a little bit later on. And manpower in a country where it's very densely populated is a very easy resource to get. And unfortunately, more than we'd like to admit, it is abused. In the article, Alex Tizon mentions katulongs and kasambahays, and Lola refers to herself as a katulong, and that makes me sad because I don't think she ever accepted herself as a slave. A katulong is not a slave. You get paid, you are allowed to see your family, you are allowed vacation, you are treated most of the time like family by the family that hires you. You sometimes can get an education, you get added benefits like going to the movies, concerts, fancy restaurants with the family, and eating with the family. I don't want anybody to think, because Lola, who was a slave, referred to her as a katulong, that word means slave. It's not. And I think she just referred to herself as a katulong because it was easier to accept than calling yourself a slave. And I feel like Lola had strong symptoms of Stockholm Syndrome when she was being abused by Tizon's mother. She was still very caring and very supportive and very motherly to Alex Tizon's mother, even though she didn't deserve it. And you tend to, when you're in an abusive situation, treat someone who has hurt you really well in order to survive. And a lot of people admire that in Lola, but I just think it's very depressing. I hope the Filipinos who have read this article are starting to slowly realize that, the way things aren't perfect, and that even though there are benefits to having a peaceful looking family relationship or a harmonious looking relationship within your family, that there are holes to that ideology where abuse can go undetected for 50 plus years in the case of Lola Eudocia, and that people in general become more vigilant and more aware and start treating other people, especially people who work for them, much better than they have been. And that's seeing people who do cleaning work and manual labor are more respected than they currently are. I'm going into a lot of things right now. I've been Bunny, and I really appreciate that you sat here and listened to me this whole entire time. Thank you.